Your Humanities Half-hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Welcome to your Humanities Half-hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today it's our pleasure to have on the show from the island of Guam, the beautiful island of Guam, Teresita Perez, also known as Terry. She's the author of a new publication called CHamoru Legends, a gathering of stories. Terry, welcome to your Humanities Half-hour.
Thank you for having me on. This is awesome.
I know that you are super busy with your online classes there at the University of Guam, so we really appreciate you taking a little bit of time to share with us about what looks like a really colorful, both artistically and content-wise, publication. Let's start off a little bit about you so that our listeners can get to know a little bit about you as the author of this book.
Wow, how do I begin? I'm from Guam, and I left Guam for a while to go to university, and then I came back and got a university job. So I've always been interested in writing. I've always been a writer, like a lot of kids who love language and love stories. So it really was just about me being in the university community and then just getting slowly involved with the community of writers that already exist here on the island. I didn't know them. There's this like cadre of writers, and they also overlap with the activist voices on Guam. So I got to know a lot of these writers, and we did a lot of work with FestPac in terms of trying to get publications out. And so, my life intertwined with all of these people, these writers, people who are into publication. Victoria Lola Leon Guerrero at UOG Press was also part of the FestPac, a committee that I belonged to in 2016. So, and she was the one obviously this is where the book started, was with Victoria Lola. So so it's really just about almost like happy accidents, kismet, things just working out. Like I happen to love writing, and coming into this community, it was really lucky, I guess.
I guess they call that serendipity, huh?
Right, very, very much so.
So this book basically, as I understand, retells 12 Chamorro legends and includes some of your personal reflections. How did the idea for this project come about?
Well, again, speaking for Lola, when she told me about the project, so Victoria Lola at UOG Press, the press had one book that dealt with legends. It was very academic. It was written by Mavis Van Penen. It was written decades ago, and Lola was thinking it flies off the shelf. Like people on Amazon, because UOG Press is on Amazon, they're always ordering this book, I think. And she said they're under the impression that it's a book about legends, but it's more of an analysis of the legends of Guam, but it's from a perspective that's not local. And it was written decades ago, right? She was a military wife. Her audience was for the military. And she goes, UOG Press needs to have a book written from a perspective that's maybe different. And I was like, okay, yeah. We need to have those books historically. It's important to have the Mavis Van Penen text. But I think for Lola, she was thinking, it can't just be this text that we have. So and she got a grant, a GVB grant. And she's like, look, put in, try to get this contract, get it and write this book. So I submitted a bid, I got chosen, and it took me about a couple of years to get it done. A year and a half, maybe. Yeah, from start to finish.
So it sounds like based on the work you do and the contacts you have, there are a lot of projects that you could have decided to devote your time and energy to. What was it about this particular idea that drew you?
I liked her pitch. I'm like, okay, I get it. But then also a little bit of arrogance. I thought, oh, it'd be easy. It's legends. We already know the legends. Um, and so I was intrigued. I thought, okay, this is not going to be so mentally taxing. And I was so wrong. It was so, wow, it was really challenging to write. But what drew me initially was, I know these stories. How difficult can it be? And it will be fun to kind of rediscover these stories. Yeah, I was wrong. It wasn't easy at all.
So, what made it so difficult?
Um, well, when I actually started to sit down and think about it, I had to ask myself, well, we have an oral tradition. Our tradition is not a written tradition, but I only know these stories through the written word. And I had to ask historian friends of mine, James Viernes, who's an actual historian with a PhD from UH. I said, how would you approach these legends so that it's not, so that it's not overly flowery? So I don't know how to put my voice into this story. And, so he gave me a lot of perspectives, Anne Hattori's also perspective on legends, kind of perpetuating oppression, colonial oppression, right? Through how legends, especially through oral tradition, as oral traditions shift, they shift because of the historical events that are happening around it. The words, the purpose of a story may end up, how are we painting the local population? How are we painting the power, the political country in power at that time? So there's always all this stuff to think about. I like to consider myself this closet historian, so I couldn't ignore that. It's not just about the creative writing and the beauty of it. It had to be contextualized. So when I sat down, what seemed easy was actually like very painful for me to kind of to deal with. So so that was an issue. That was a big problem. I think that was the biggest problem, was finding my voice in it.
I think that's one of the things that people might find surprising about this book is it's not just a compilation of legends. There's other elements of, for example, as you stated, your personal reflections, and then there's also some artwork, and then there's a CHamoru rendition of the legends. Give us a better idea of what people will find in this publication.
Well, I think it's because of the historical issues and the issues of voice and ownership of stories. It was sort of this idea of, it's not just about one woman's interpretation of legends, it's about a community's interpretation. So it's about having it needed to be in CHamoru, right? And it needed to be sort of filtered through whatever layers needed to be filtered through the mind of the CHamoru speaker. So Senora Anne Rivera, she is about 10 years older than me, and she is a native speaker of the language. And in consultation with Senora Flores, those two worked on, here's the translation. So Senora Anne translated my versions. And of course, she put her own spin into it. It's sort of like, not that she rewrote things, but the way translation is never direct. There's always interpretation involved. And then the other filter of Senora Flores, who's the copy editor, but who basically, she was checking for spelling, but she would also negotiate with Senora Anne about, well, is this the right word, or is there another way to say this? And so it was that end of it. And then the artists, when Victoria Lola and I were thinking about, here are all the artists' submissions. And we were looking at this like, we can't just choose one. Everybody has a different take on, here's the boy who leapt to Luta, and here's two lovers. It's like, but this artwork would work so well with this story, and this would work. And so again, it was another layer of another like filter for translation and interpretation and a different angle or a different perspective. So they would work with my version, but then they would be inspired by a line and they would go somewhere with that line. So it's really just, I call it a community-based work. So if it's retold by me, but I don't own these stories, and it's the community takes ownership of all of it. And that's what you'll find in this book is all of these different perspectives on the story, because it's not about this is my version, it's the version. Of course not. It's a version, and here's another version, and there are all these other versions out there. But yeah, so that's what you'll find when you open it. This potpourri of vision.
I guess that's also just so indicative of the Chamorro culture and the Carolinian culture as well. It's like the sense of ownership is not individual; it's community based. So that's a lovely approach. I love
right. Yeah, it was, and that was part of like, oh, this is how I can be okay with this historically, and to kind of acknowledge that we have changed, that these stories have changed, that they have filtered, but that is what oral tradition is. That the same incident seen by my auntie and my uncle and my grandfather, they're all going to retell that story differently anyway. That's what oral tradition is. So and that's where the reflections came out of. The first reflection was just me trying to sort through, just to come to terms with my conflict. And then Lola said, well, you can't just have one reflection. I'm like, why not? Can't I just have one reflection? So it was, and then so it became like, okay, I do have a link to everything somehow personally to each of these stories. And so that's the additional, that was unintentional. That was not the plan to have my reflections. That just, again, very organically grew out of the book. A lot of the stuff was just organically grown, very much.
Well, I do want to give us a chance to talk about some of the actual legends in the book in the second half of our show. But before we take a break, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on the cultural values that are portrayed in the legends. I would say based on my experience learning about, for example, Palauan storyboards and the legends that were contained there, I realized from my Western perspective that sometimes the story in the storyboard or the Palauan legend didn't necessarily jive with what I thought should be the moral of the story. You know what I'm saying? Did you experience anything like that, a very different perspective, or what did you find were some of the cultural values expressed through the legends you documented?
Well, a lot of working just with what I know and with how I was raised by really, old people, there's a lot of conflict and tension with family expectations and the individual expectation. And it's sort of, we look at two lovers. What is the tragedy of two lovers? Is she didn't want to do what her parents expected her to do. What is the tragedy of Serena? And Serena is, well, we can look at it as tragedy or not, or as a sort of liberating transformation for her in some ways. But it's this idea of your mom wants you to clean, but you want to swim. And that's, of course, I'm essentializing it. I'm making it, I'm oversimplifying it. But that's one of the values. The other value is this idea of, is there such a thing as a happy ending? And do things wrap up nicely and neatly? Because life doesn't until maybe you die, and then even then we don't know. But the idea of legends, the endings are always, there's an unease to what happens. Either it's the death or, okay, she's now a mermaid, now what? Does she ever meet her mom again? Whatever, right? So it's this idea of, is that a cultural value? This acknowledgement that life doesn't wrap up tidy and nice and neat. It's not the Disney happy ending. So these are some of the things that I had to think about. And then, of course, I have no way of knowing right? I can't ask my auntie, way before ancestors, hey, what do you guys think about happy endings? Are they trite? Are they just don't happen? So, so it's fascinating. So yeah, there are a lot of different things that I encountered in terms of, oh, it's not just about family values and cooperation. It's deeper than that.
Well, we're chatting today with Teresita L. Perez. She's the author of CHamoru Legends, A Gathering of Stories, and we'll be back to talk about more of the legends in the book after this break.
The COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact our daily lives, including our cultural institutions and individuals who contribute to the humanities. The Northern Marianas Humanities Council is pleased to announce a new grant program to respond to the needs of nonprofit organizations and individual participants in the humanities who need support through this difficult time. The COVID-19 Relief Grant provides up to $15,000 to eligible organizations and up to $10,000 to eligible individuals. Visit the Northern Marianas Humanities Council website at www.nmhcouncil.org/COVID-19 to learn more about this opportunity for relief. The Northern Marianas Humanities Council COVID-19 relief grants are made possible by funding from the U.S. Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, and the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half-hour. We're speaking with Teresita Perez, the author of CHamoru Legends, A Gathering of Stories. So, Terry, I want to ask, did you have a favorite legend personally among the 12?
Well, what's interesting is I was really just kind of neutral about most of the stories. I love my Tatamona stories. I love my stories about ghosts. And so there aren't really a lot of legends about that, except for one in the book. But I hated Juan Mullah stories. I didn't want to do any Juan Mullah stories, which is, Juan Mullah is the Chamorro native who is a trickster. And he's been interpreted in many, many ways. Some people have analyzed him as this sort of the defiant Chamorro against Spanish colonial power. Okay, that's one way to look at him. And so I was thinking, I don't want to put Juan Mullah in my stories, but I ended up reading about him, and I collected a whole bunch of different Juan Mullah stories from research at Mark. And then one of the Juan Mullah, the really short anecdotes about him and how he one-ups people. And so the last Juan Mullah story I collected was actually an oral tradition story. One of my coworkers, he's very much a Chamorro speaker, and his aunties used to tell him all these Juan Mullah stories in Chamorro. They would tell him in Chamorro, and so he said to me, because I don't understand Chamorro, he said, I can only retell it in Chamorro. I can try to translate it. And he did. He wrote it down in Chamorro, and he would tell me the English version of it. And I couldn't find it written anywhere. And so to me, that in and of itself made the Juan Mullah stories special, because there was one story that was truly oral tradition, at least from my perspective, and that in the Mark archives, I couldn't find this version written anywhere. So putting it down in words was very scary, because I'm like, okay, I'm already putting it down in words now, but I'm gonna try and be careful to his the version that he's carrying from his old aunties who told him in Chamorro. Gosh, I just when I think about that, I'm like, that is such a valuable resource right there. So I strung together all these stories, and I just made it a day in the life of Juan Mullah and all of his adventures, and how he one-ups everybody who tries to humiliate him. Even if it's a small bit of humiliation, he finds a way. It's like, okay, I'm going to show you. And And I kind of fell in love with him after I had to write the stories. I had to go through the process of researching and collecting an oral tradition version and writing it down. And I'm like, I love this guy.
Why? Why did you love him?
Because he wasn't just about political, he wasn't necessarily just about one-upping the Spanish. He was just about, I want to put people in their place. They think they're better than me. And I'm going to put you in your place. And I'm going to show you, look at me. I am in rags. I'm broke, but I got over on you. I tricked you. And I love that. I love that lesson. I'm like, is that a cultural value? Like, don't try to be too big for your britches because you're going to get it, from someone. And that's how I was raised,
Kind of, yeah, I could see that a little bit.
So I fell in love with that story. Totally fell in love with it.
I remember when I was a kid reading a comic in the Pacific Daily News called Juan Mullah Manga. Is that related?
Yes, inspired, right?
Okay,
The one Mullah, right. Exactly, one Mullah Manga, right. Oh my gosh.
And when I first started reading that, I thought it was just like a Chamorro language comic to, practice Chamorro. And then as I started to understand Chamorro more, I was like, no, this is actually funny. This guy has a sense of humor. Yeah.
Right. And to me, the beauty of those kinds of characters is, part of why we laugh at the things that happen is we know that there's something off. We know that there's something a little bit wrong about what's happening. And so when we laugh at it, we know we shouldn't be laughing at Juan Mullah stealing money from people. We know we shouldn't, but we know that, well, what happened to him was wrong. So even though he's being a thief, or he's stealing horses from people, and we shouldn't be cheering for him. I mean, we do. We do. We see it. Yeah. So I ended up just totally falling in love with the Juan Mullah stories, which was a really good lesson. Like my the ancestors from above are saying, oh yeah, so you think you hate this? Well, I'll show you. There's a lot to love about him. Yeah, really good.
Other than Juan Mullah, would you say there are any other lesser known legends included in the book? Or are they generally more of the popular ones?
Well, here's the thing. When we selected the legends, I had in mind, this is not a book for our people. I mean, I could be wrong about that. I thought, we know our stories. Why do we want to read them? And I had to think, because I know Lola was like, well, do we want to put the well-known ones? I'm like, why not? The well-known ones are like Two Lovers, Serena. These are the ones that the people who are living in New York City, with the children who are diaspora, or whoever is buying it in the big wide world, they don't know these stories like we do. I mean, I didn't expect that the audience would be the local reader. However, we did find, for example, the Ukudu story, which has a Luta connection. Ukudu travels to Luta, and he's like a trickster too. He's not a very nice chief. Well, and he but again, that's the beauty. He's the hero, but you're like, oh, he's kind of horrible. He's kind of a terrible person.
Wait, but, I haven't heard of this legend. How does the story go?
Well, it's Ukudu is traveling the seas during a storm. Like, he's this amazing, navigator, but he's going to Luta, so it's really not that far. But he ends up on the shore of Luta, but he happens to land there. He knows that the chief is dying. So in an opportunistic way, he goes there to kind of see what he can see. So everybody's mourning the passing of this chief in Luta, this big, and he's got all these beautiful daughters, and Ukudu ends up with one of the daughters. That's, not spoiler alert, but you see it coming. You know that if the chief has all these beautiful daughters, and
right,
but it's more about because he's traveling during a storm, the people in Luta are like, ooh, he's already kind of gifted, right? He's navigating through high winds. Okay, great. So he says that he has the cure for the chief. but he needs to go into the jungle and he needs to take an assistant, and it's one of the daughters. And that's basically what happens. So it really doesn't make the people of Luta look really good. And I'm like, whoa, I've never heard this story. I mean, we have a high school
I've
name.
never heard this story. No.
And unfortunately, I've only been able to find translations of it, a modern one in an anthology, an NMI anthology, put out by Best Press. I think Bo Flood did a lot of that work for that. And then Mark, when I looked at the Guam Recorder from, I think it was from the 1920s, there was a translation of it. And I'm like, okay, so this is where Bo Flood got this idea. Or maybe, I'm assuming that there's this existence of this version. But that version in the recorder, the Guam Recorder, was translated by a foreigner. So I don't have a Chamorro version of it or a Chamorro person who translated it into English. So I would love to find an original source for that legend. And it might have to be in the NMI. It might be somewhere buried in Luta. I don't know. But yeah, so that one was way lesser known. That one's in there. So I think it's kind of brilliant, actually.
How would you say being a part of this project changed you as a person?
Oh, well, it wasn't an easy process. And again, it's the idea of maybe it's a reminder that we can't be oversure of anything. Like, oh, writing legends is easy. No, it wasn't. It's painful. It's painful.
It was painful because it sounds like you really wanted to do a good job and do it faithfully.
Right. Anybody can rewrite a story. Anybody can retell Cinderella. A little child can retell Cinderella in 60 seconds. But so the retelling itself is not difficult. It's just, how do I do this? And yeah. So to me, the mystery of why it was so difficult, it's a mystery to me, but it was just about it caused me so much anxiety. Like, I want to get this right. I want to do it right. And of course, I would love to revise this and like redo things. And like, I read and go, oh my God, I wish I had done this differently. So I in terms of transformative, I think it was more reminders of being grounded, being humble, that art comes with great sacrifice. And I'm not saying that this is art per se, but that if you want to create art, if you think you're creating art, there is some sort of blood, sweat, and tears involved in that process. And maybe that's the metamorphosis, that's the transformation, is coming out of that anxiety or whatever, coming out it on the other side. Yeah.
Well, it was recently Drop Everything and Read Day nationwide, and I was so pleased to see one of my friends on Facebook post a picture reading CHamoru Legends, a gathering of stories. So for people who are interested in getting a copy, where can they find it?
If they are on Guam, I know that UOG Press right here on campus carries it. So all you would have to do is go upstairs and say, hey, Bestseller carries it, I think, online. It's on Amazon. So that's how you can get it. It's lot of beautiful, again, it is a colorful book. You said that at the top of the program. The artwork is pretty stunning, and they're all local artists, and they're all different. So that in and of itself, I think, is just an amazing part of this book, the art.
So glad you've been able to make time for us today to talk about the book, and I wanted to give you a chance for any closing thoughts before we go today.
Well, first of all, my pleasure. I'm still kind of stunned that people want to talk to me about it. It's like it's a book, whatever.
I think you're glowing at this point, Terry. You look really happy about it.
Well, I guess because it's like talking about a child too, right? So yeah, because I guess I'm still just really stunned that people want to know about it, and I love talking about the process of the book. But final thoughts, it's like, keep telling your stories. Pass your stories down. I think that's that's another lesson. I think that's what's transformed me. I don't want to take stories for granted anymore.
We've been talking about the book CHamoru Legends, A Gathering of Stories with author Teresita Perez. And as you said, you can find it on Amazon and other sources. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. You can contact us at 670-HUMANITIES. And if you'd like to hear more Your Humanities Half Hour, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, again with the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Thank you, Terry, and take care of yourselves over there in Guam.
You too, everybody. Stay safe.
This has been Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Terry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.